Jai Jai Shri Caitanya Jayo Nityananda. Jai Advaita Chandra Jayo Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Jai Jai Shri Caitanya Jayo Nityananda. Jai Advaita Chandra Jayo Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Jai Jai Shri Caitanya Jayo Nityananda. Jai Advaita Chandra Jayo Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. So Hare Krishna everybody, today we are reading from Caitanya Caritamrita Adi Leela chapter 17, text number 71. I was told 70 and 71, but it looks like 70 might have been covered yesterday, but that's okay because there's a lot to cover in 71 anyways. So Haridasa Thakure Karila Prasad Acharya Sthane Matara Khandila Aparad Haridasa Thakure Karila Prasad Acharya Sthane Matara Khandila Aparad Haridasa Thakure Karila Prasad Acharya Sthana Matara Khandila Aparad Haridasa Thakure Karila Prasad Acharya Sthana Matara Khandila Aparad Haridasa Thakure Karila Prasad Acharya Sthana Matara Khandila Aparad. Mataji's. Haridasa Thakure Karela Prasad Acharya Sthana Matara Khandela Parad Haridasa Thakure Karela Prasad Acharya Sthana Matara Khandela Aparad. Word meaning? Haridasa Thakure on to Haridas Thakur. Karila did. Prasada benediction. Acharya Sthane in the home of Advaita Acharya. Matara of Sachimata. Khandaila vanquished. Aparadha the offense. The translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. After this incident, the Lord blessed Haridas Thakur and vanquished the offense of his mother at the home of Advaita Acharya. Purport. On the Paksha day, the Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu embraced Haridas Thakur and informed him that he was none other than an incarnation of Prahlad Maharaj. When Vishwarupa took sannyas, Sachimata thought that Advaita Acharya had persuaded him to do so. Therefore, she accused him of this, which was an offense at Advaita Acharya's lotus feet. Later, Lord Chaitanya induced his mother to take the dust of Advaita Acharya's lotus feet, and thus her Vaishnava Apradha was nullified. Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupakadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Utapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagajatam Sagna Raghunatan Vitam Tam Sajivam Satvaitam Savadutam Paridana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishbhanusute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyaiva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Namo Namaha Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Langhayate Girim Yat Kripatamaham Shri Gurum Dinataranam Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristhaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashyata Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So in this text, there are two pastimes of the Lord which are described. The first one was when Lord Chaitanya embraced Haridas Thakur, and the second one is relating to his mother, Sachi Mata. Times and some learnings we can take from both of them. So the first one was, so essentially these pastimes happened on the day of the Mahaprakasha. This Mahaprakasha was when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was performing Sankirtan in the house of, or in the veranda of Srivas Thakur. And at that time the Kirtan went on and on for a long time, and the Lord went into complete ecstasy. And when the Lord went into complete ecstasy, at that time he decided to show his form, his various different forms as his various incarnations in which he appeared many millennia ago. So there the devotees got to see all the incarnations of the Lord. So while this was happening, all the devotees came to the Lord and they offered their obeisances, and they were all like seeing the Lord in the particular feature that they were most attracted to. Like for example, in the previous verse, the discussion was of Sridhar Kolavecha. Now he was a cowherd boy in the pastimes of Lord Krishna, but in the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya, he incarnated as a very poor beggar. Form of the Lord which he was most attracted towards, and similarly all the other devotees were also seeing the various forms of the Lord. So now here it is explained that after this whole incident happened, at that time Lord Chaitanya, he blessed Haridas Thakur and told him that he was none other than an incarnation of Prahlad Maharaj. Now Haridas Thakur, as we all know, is Namacharya. So he is the Acharya, or he is the most important person in terms of propagating the holy name. So why did this is a bit of a confusion here, because many people consider Haridas Thakur to be an incarnation of Lord Brahma, but here it's explained that he is an incarnation of Prahlad Maharaj. So actually I did some research on this, and there are two different sources. One source says that he was an incarnation of Prahlad Maharaj. He is an incarnation of Lord Brahma. And there's a third source, I think in Chaitanya Bhagavat, where it's explained that he was actually an incarnation of both. And there was a reason for that. Why Lord Prahlad Maharaj also. So the reason is that, as we know that Prahlad Maharaj, as we just recently celebrated Narsimha Chaturdashi, we know that Prahlad Maharaj took birth in a demoniac family. So he was born to Hiranyakashipu, and like Hiranyaksha was also in the same family. These two were like the biggest demons that the world has ever seen before. So because he was born in that, he considered himself to be born in a low and disqualified family for performing devotional service. But nonetheless, by the extreme mercy of the Lord, he considered himself to be very fortunate. So similarly, you can see there are some similarities here, that Haridas Thakur was also, apparently he was born in a Mlecha family. So he was born in family of some Muslims, and that's why he considered himself to be disqualified to perform the devotional service of the Lord. Yet, because of the extreme mercy of the Lord, he considered himself very fortunate. Which is why, because of his gratitude, he chanted 192 rounds of Hare Krishna Mahamantra every day. So that mood was of gratitude. In fact, so much so that he would chant. So I mean, you can imagine, like it takes us 2 hours to chant 16 rounds. So if he's chanting 192 rounds, it would almost take him 16 hours to chant his rounds. And we normally stay awake for 16 hours. So it's a bit interesting. So you can imagine like how much time he would actually have to do his other stuff. So if he's chanting for 16 hours, then he probably only sleeps for like 2 or 3 hours. So that's why he was known as Namacharya. He was preaching the glories of the holy name. Not only that, not only was he chanting the holy name, but also he was going out and preaching. So in the Gaudiya tradition, actually in all sampradayas, this is the case. Like you have two different types of devotees. You have the Goshtiyanandis and you have the Bhajananandis. So Goshtiyanandis are those who go out and preach, and Bhajananandis are those that sit in a solitary place and perform their bhajan. In Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Leela, we see that most devotees fit into both categories. So we see that although there were devotees who were day and night, or they especially during the night, they kept on chanting. During the day, they went out and preached. So we see that in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Leela, this was a special case. Like all the 6 Goswamis were like that, Haridas Thakur was like that. They were all so much interested in not only performing their own bhajan, but also going out and preaching. Whereas when time passed by and the effects of Kali Yuga became more prominent, we see that people generally picked one path. They either did their own solitary bhajan, or they focused on preaching for most of their time. So we see that Haridas Thakur, obviously, he performed both. So he was out with Nityananda Prabhu. So they were in the same preaching party. Then they would go out and they would preach, and they would preach to the most fallen people, because they wanted to spread the glories of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And that is actually the mood of the preacher. The preacher does not try to look for easy targets, like, okay, well, I will go and preach somewhere where, I will be well respected, people will look after me, etc. The genuine preacher, he will go out and preach to people who will not respect him, who may even disregard him, because he knows that if he is able to successfully preach in a particular group of people who are not very elevated or not very exalted, then the glory of the Lord will be magnified. That is the special case. Like, for example, we see that Haridas Thakur and Nityananda Prabhu, they went and preached to the most fallen people, like Jagai and Madhai, for example. This is only one pastime which is mentioned in Caitanya Caritamrita, but if you read Chaitanya Bhagavat, there's more description about how Nityananda Prabhu and Haridas Thakur went and preached to all the thieves, the rogues, etc. There are so many pastimes related to that. But the main pastime is that they preached to Jagai and Madhai, and because of their conversion, because of the conversion of Jagai and Madhai, Lord Chaitanya's glory was spread all throughout Gaudadesh, because people started to understand that maybe, yes, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is someone special. So that is why this preaching movement is very important, not for our own sense gratification, but for the glorification of Krishna. And in fact, this preaching mission has been going on for a very long time, but it's become more prominent in the last 500 years since Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So this whole idea of preaching to a certain section of people who may not even reciprocate with what you have to offer and with your own nature, it can be quite intimidating. It can be quite challenging, because at some point you may even worry for your life. You don't know if these people will accept the message of God as it is, because ultimately the preacher has no selfish or personal desire for spreading the holy name. Actually, whatever they're doing is they're doing it for the pleasure of their acharya, or they're doing it for the pleasure of the Lord. So that is why preachers should be very well respected, and in most of the world we see that, especially among devotees, the preachers are respected. But among the non-devotees, they may not be respected. And a very good example is Srila Prabhupada. Like Srila Prabhupada, especially for the first, how many ever years, like first 69 years of his life, he was not very well respected at all. Even though he showed all the signs of a Uttama devotee, like an Uttama Adhikari, according to the Pancharatric texts, there are 70 different characteristics of Uttama Adhikari that you can find, especially in the Narada Pancharatra, it's explained. And Srila Prabhupada possessed all of them, because he was an Uttama Adhikari, not just after going to the West, but even before going to the West, he possessed all of them. But hardly anyone recognized him. So it is said, actually, there is one scripture known as Kavya Shastra. Kavya Shastra means literature regarding poetry. Over there it is explained that great devotees of the Lord are sometimes like flowers which blossom, or very beautiful flowers which blossom in a jungle, which may not be seen or may not be discovered by everyone, but they shine in their own beauty over there. So sometimes pure devotees may be like that. Like you may not recognize that they're pure devotees until the time is right, which was the same case with Srila Prabhupada. So we all know, we don't have to highlight how many troubles Srila Prabhupada took, but if you read Lilamrita, you will see how many troubles he took before coming to the West. So in fact, like the people who should have helped him the most did not help him, and they turned their back on him. But all of this was part of Krishna's plan to show that Srila Prabhupada was not motivated for his own self glorification or for his own self interest. He was actually interested more in the deliverance of all of humanity at large. In fact, all living entities. To say humanity is probably a bit limiting, because Srila Prabhupada was very much interested in the welfare of all living beings throughout this universe, actually. So because he was so much interested, that's why he was very, very dear to Krishna. And you can see, like, I mean, this is again known as Nahi Ninda Nyaya, which means that sometimes you may compare a particular personality to someone else, and it may appear that you're downplaying the other personality, but the idea is to glorify the first personality. So what I'm going to do now is an example of that. So like if you compare Srila Prabhupada to his other godbrothers, for example, these godbrothers were much more, in Srila Prabhupada's own words, these people were much more scholarly than Srila Prabhupada himself. He admitted many times. He said that some of my godbrothers are very, very more scholarly, and he said, I don't know why my Guru Maharaj or why my godbrothers have given me this title of Bhakti Vedanta. Because he said, I definitely do not deserve this. Obviously, Srila Prabhupada was speaking in his humility, but you can understand the point that, yeah, there were some devotees who were very, very scholarly. Like Keshav Pragya Maharaj, for example, Sridhar Maharaj, these were very, very scholarly devotees. But Krishna chose Srila Prabhupada to propagate his movement, because Srila Prabhupada, from his early days, you will see if you read Lilamrita, you will notice that from his early days, he was more interested in preaching. He was more interested in broadcasting the message of Krishna consciousness. Guru Mukha Padma Vakya Chitte Te Koriya Aikya, which means that the words of the spiritual master, the words that emanate from the lotus mouth of the spiritual master, were his life and soul. Because his spiritual master had told him that he should preach in the West and he should preach in English, he essentially considered that to be his heart and soul. So his whole life was molded around these instructions. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Vyavasayatmika buddhi ekeha kurunandana, which means that Bahushakha yanantascha buddhayo vyavasayanam, which means that one should have his intelligence very streamlined, and it should be one-pointed intelligence. And when one has one-pointed intelligence, one can achieve success in his life. And one whose intelligence is many-branched, Krishna says, such a person cannot achieve the desired goal. Now, people have taken many materialistic conceptions of this as well, but Srila Prabhupada in the purport, he highlights that his inspiration for this was the commentary of Baldev Vidyabhushan, in which he identified that the one goal of the devotee or a disciple should be to fulfill the orders of his spiritual master. That's where the one-pointed intelligence has to be. That am I fulfilling the orders of my spiritual master, or am I not fulfilling the orders of my spiritual master? Is my action, is my activity, is my preaching, are my words, my minds, my thoughts, are they glorifying the spiritual master, or are they not? So when one has such an intelligence, then for such a person, it's easy to cross over the ocean of material existence, and also not just that, but deliver many other people. Now the thing is, many people are interested in their own welfare, which is understandable, because Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita that the intelligent person, especially in the 13th chapter, that one of the signs of knowledge is that one should understand the evil of birth, death, old age and disease, which means that one should try to free himself from birth, death, old age and disease. So many people become interested by that, and then they're more interested in delivering themselves from birth, death, old age and disease. So they try to perform their own bhajan, they try to perform their own devotional service, but without trying to preach. Now that was condemned by Srila Prabhupada on many instances, because Srila Prabhupada said that only in the act of delivering other people will you be able to deliver yourself also. So when one acts in that process where they are trying to help other people, only then can we actually also receive the mercy of Krishna. And there are many reasons for that. Firstly, the whole quality of I mean, Krishna mentions certain qualities which are required to go back to the spiritual world. And one of them is tolerance. Now, how are we meant to develop tolerance if we perform bhajan solitary in our own place and if we don't really go out and preach? Now, we're not saying it has to be like full on preaching, like you have to do like a pandal program and stuff. Preaching just means that we have to try to convince others of Krishna conscious philosophy. So, firstly, we should be convinced that Krishna consciousness is the best benediction for humanity and for all living entities at large. When we are convinced, then we should try to convince other people. Now, this type of preaching may happen on different levels. Like for some people, it may be that they're preaching within their family, they're preaching to their friends, they're preaching to their workmates, etc. And for some people, like those who are sannyasis or those who are brahmacharis who don't have any or who have stayed away from family responsibilities, for them the door is open. They can preach to many other people, including those who are from a materialistic point of view, that they're not worthy to receive the message. For them, that door is also wide open. That's not to say that grihasthas can't do that also. For grihasthas also it is possible, but it is more so possible for those who are in the renounced order of life. So it doesn't have to be that we have to preach at that high level. We just have to try to preach at whatever level we are at. Like for example, even trying to raise Krishna conscious kids, trying to make one child Krishna conscious, but diverting your complete attention to that is also an act of preaching. In fact, Srila Prabhupada has said that many times in his letters to his devotees, especially those Grihastha disciples who, even though they have kids, they were trying and doing more service than looking after their kids. Srila Prabhupada said that, you should focus on your kids because these kids are also Vaishnavas. And these Vaishnavas need to be cultivated as well. So actually this whole idea that preaching only happens at the high level is a misconception. Preaching happens at many different levels. And whenever a devotee preaches to someone else about Krishna, about Lord Chaitanya, then Guru or Srila Prabhupada becomes very satisfied, because that is the whole mood and mission of Srila Prabhupada, which is to preach the glories of Krishna and to preach the science of self-realization to everyone. So that is why this quality of tolerance is developed only when we preach. Because if we're performing our own solitary bhajan in our own room, in our own, for example, we won't be able to develop this quality of tolerance. Because to develop tolerance, you need people who will disagree with you, who say all kinds of things to you, and who will, in quote unquote, they will try to put you in your place. And we as conditioned living entities, we have this mentality that we want to lord it over the material nature. We want to show to everyone that I am the best, etc. So this whole quality of tolerance and humility will only come when we actually go out and we preach. Now this preaching can also come in the form of attending Harinam and distributing books. Now I'm sure majority of you would have some experience with distributing books, but you will realize that that is a very, very humbling experience. Because when we go out to distribute books, people will say no to you, especially when you're somewhat materialistically you're situated in a high position and you have so many juniors under you. Then it may seem, like whatever I say people do, people listen to me, that's fine. But then when you go out on the street and no one knows who you are, and you are considered to be maybe a nuisance in their eyes, and when you try to distribute a book to them and then they either rebuke you or they say no, etc. And then even then, when you're able to maintain that frame of mind that yes, I'm doing all of this for the pleasure of Krishna, that yes, I am a servant of Krishna and my primary duty is to serve Krishna even if he decides to humiliate me. So when we maintain that mentality and we are able to maintain that consciousness, then that is the perfection of life, because that is the real constitutional position of the living entity, which is that he is ultimately a servant of Krishna. So that is why the preacher, or those who actually go out and preach the glories of the holy name, these kinds of devotees are extremely dear to Krishna. And we see here, in fact, later on we will see that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu actually embraced Haridas Thakur. So when one completes the work of the Lord and does more than what is required, the Lord becomes extremely happy. In fact, in the Ramayana, when Hanuman performs more than what is required and comes back to Lord Ram, Lord Ram says that, I don't have anything that I can give you. He says, if I give you all the riches of this material world, and if I make you Brahma for the next day, and if I give you liberation, he says all of these would actually be an insult to your service. He's not saying that all of this would be insufficient. He's saying that that would actually be an insult to your service. Because he says it's almost like someone who has saved your life and you give him a peanut. Because in Krishna's eyes, the opulence of this material world and the opulence of even liberation is very, very insignificant. Krishna does not consider any of these to be significant. So Lord Ram says to Hanuman, he says that because I am so indebted to you and I don't have anything to give you, the only thing I can give you is my embrace. Similarly, thing to his devotees also. Like we see that when Sudama was one of Krishna's childhood friends, and when he comes to Krishna and he gives him just some uncooked rice, Krishna becomes so obliged and he says that, I want to give you something. And for like one handful of rice, he gives him one entire planetary system. He says, you should be able to rule over this. And Krishna becomes so obliged by any kind of service that is offered to him. And that's why it's seen that for those glories of the holy name. In fact, Srila Prabhupada said that if you continue to preach, if you continue to distribute books, if you continue to do Harinam throughout your life, he says that the back door of Vaikuntha will be open for you. He says that I will make sure that you come back to the spiritual world. So maintaining that consciousness throughout our lives to be able to continue to preach is very difficult, because that's when we get attacked by Maya also. And we see that in the life of Haridas Thakur also. Like, he was attacked by Maya at one point. Obviously, Maya could not do anything to him. For those of you who don't know, there was an incident where there was a governor of the place where Haridas Thakur was living. I think his name was Ramchandra Khan. Anyone can correct me if I was wrong. But I think to show that Haridas Thakur was actually a fraud. He was not a genuine devotee. So what he did was he sent a prostitute to Haridas Thakur, so that if she's able to lure him, and he can then send in some police officers to show that he's been caught in the act, and then they can imprison him and blaspheme him in the whole community. So he obviously tried that, but the opposite result happened, in that the prostitute that was sent actually became Krishna conscious, and she became a pure devotee of the Lord. So in this way, he was not able to fulfill his purpose, and actually Haridas Thakur became even more glorified. And Haridas Thakur initiated back in the day, initiation was not very formal, but initiation, Thakur gave her some beads and left that place, and he went to another place. So we can see that such is the power of Haridas Thakur, that he is able to conquer. In fact, so much so that we see that when focus your mind on Krishna, he refused the order of the Lord. He said that actually that's not possible for me. He says that even if I try chanting, my tongue will not stop chanting, and I need to continue to chant. So he continued to chant until he left his last breath. And Caitanya Mahaprabhu was so pleased and so obliged by this service of Haridas Thakur that he personally carried his body after he had left his body. So this just goes to show that the mind and activity of a Krishna conscious preacher is very, very dear to Krishna. Not just the soul, but even the body, because that soul is touched, or this material body has assisted that spirit soul. So even that body becomes dear to Krishna. So that is why it's explained that Caitanya Mahaprabhu then blessed Haridas Thakur following the Mahaprakasha Leela. Then, we kind of touched on it initially, but then the next concept comes, which is that there was this person, Ramchandra Khan, who tried to commit an offense at the feet of Haridas Thakur by trying to frame him, blaspheme him. And that is actually somewhat discussed in the next section of the verse, which is that he vanquished the offense of his mother at the home of Advaita Acharya. Basically, what had happened was, for those of you, I'm sure many of you are aware of what had actually happened, but for those of you who are not aware, what had happened was that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had an elder brother whose name was Vishwarupa. And Vishwarupa, it's explained that Advaita Acharya had come to their house, to Jagannath Mishra and Sachi Mata's house, and he had taken Vishwarupa away because as he was traveling, he took Vishwarupa away, and Vishwarupa eventually became a sannyasi. So at that time, Sachi Mata, she held a grudge in her mind against, or she held a grudge in her heart against Advaita Acharya. She said that he claims to be Advaita, which is non-dual, but he is actually Advaita Acharya. Dvaita means dual. He likes to divide people. He likes to divide me and my son. So when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also ended up taking sannyas, at that time she started to cultivate this thought more and more. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, being the Chitta Guru, or he being the Paramatma in the heart of every living entity, he understood that Sachi Mata had this thought against Advaita Acharya. And when Krishna sees that his devotees have been afflicted or tainted by some kind of offense, he doesn't really like that. He likes to see because he is pure and he is completely devoid of any offense or any fault, he likes to see that his devotees are also devoid of any fault and devoid of any offense. Because Krishna is so pure, he likes his devotees to be pure as well. So he wanted to essentially purify or nullify this offense that Sachi Mata had committed at the lotus feet of Advaita Acharya. So he publicly announced that everyone is eligible to get the love of God at the feet of Lord Krishna, except for Sachi Mata, except for my mother. So then when the devotees heard that, they became so astonished, and some of them even fainted. They said that, how is it possible for your own mother? How can you be so cruel to your own mother that you will not be able to give her Krishna Prem? So then he said that actually she has committed offenses at the lotus feet of Advaita Acharya, and that's why she will not achieve Krishna Prema even at the end of this life. So then the devotee said, well, what can be done? What can be done? They were discussing amongst themselves. And then Lord Chaitanya suggested that if she takes the dust from the lotus feet of Advaita Acharya and puts it on her head, then that offense will be nullified. But the problem is that Advaita Acharya will not consent to that happening. So while Sachi Mata was trying to take the dust from the lotus feet of Advaita Acharya was thinking, oh my God, how can the Lord's mother take dust from my lotus feet? So just thinking about that made him faint, because it made him unconscious. So then that was the perfect opportunity for Sachi Mata to take dust from his lotus feet and apply it to her head. So in this way, her offense was nullified. So in this pastime, essentially, the concept of offense or Vaishnava Aprad is being discussed. So now if we read the Padma Purana, it's explained that there are 6 different types of Vaishnava offenses, going from very gross to very subtle. The most gross form of Vaishnava offense is killing a Vaishnava. Now, that may not be very applicable to many of us, but it has happened in the past, especially some of the governments. Like I was reading this book called The Salted Bread. It was a very old book. I don't know how many of you have read it, but Salted Bread?
Salted bread. Oh,
Salted Bread, yeah.
in Russia.
Yeah, the one in Russia, that's right, yeah. So it talks about how there were 2 devotees, Sankirtan devotees. They were preachers, and they were essentially unjustly arrested by the Russian government, and they were tortured, and one of them ended up dying. He lost we shouldn't say die, but he left his body. And yeah, that would constitute to Vaishnava offense, because a pure devotee of the Lord was killed in that sense. So after that, that's the most gross form. That doesn't really happen nowadays. But the second most gross form is to blaspheme a pure devotee of the Lord. Now that does happen on many levels. Now blaspheming a devotee of the Lord can also happen, like you can either say that, so and such a devotee is completely nonsense, like this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, etc. Or it can be on very subtle levels also. Like for example, when a disciple disobeys the order of his spiritual master, Bhaktivinoda Thakur explains that is actually equivalent to blaspheming the devotee, or blaspheming the spiritual master, because the disciple is meant to be a perfect representative of his spiritual master. But when the disciple decides to add mental speculation, or you could say even distort the teachings of his spiritual master and present them in a different light, that amounts to blaspheming the spiritual master also. So even within blaspheming, there are gross and there are very subtle levels. So that is the second type of Vaishnava offense. The third type of Vaishnava offense is quite subtle actually. We may not even realize it, but it is being envious of devotees. Now, this problem of envy is something which can potentially even happen in the spiritual world, unfortunately. So, like for example, we know that Narottam Das Thakur has suggested that there are remedies for 5 out of 6 what do you call them? Like, I don't know what you would say them. Um, 5 out of 6 malices of the mind, you could say. Like Kam, Krodh, Lobh, Moh, Mad, Matsarya, for example. So lust, anger, greed, pride, etc. So he recommends that there are solutions for 5 of them, but there is no solution for one of the malice within the heart, and that is envy. He says that for that, the living entity has to perfectly rely on the mercy of the Supreme Lord, or he has to fix it himself. The other things, he gives solutions. Like, for example, he says that if you have lust and you want to control this lust, he says that the best thing to do is to work very hard for Krishna. If you have greed, you should use that greed for getting devotee association and for hearing Krishna Katha. He says that if one wants to become mad, like Mada is one of them, mad, then one should become mad by chanting the holy names of the Lord. And in that he can exhibit his madness. That's fine. But for envy, there is no solution. And this is actually quite interesting because we, as spirit souls or conditioned living entities, we came into this material world because of envy. Because we were envious of Krishna in the spiritual world, we essentially had to we had to come down into this material world, and we have to live this conditioned life. So now one may say, well, I'm not envious of any devotee. I'm really not, I don't think I'm envious of people. But if we do a little bit of introspection, we will realize that, especially in the Bible, it says that one should consider the neighbor as oneself. Now, it may seem like a very superficial teaching, but actually this whole talk is about envy. Because if we don't become happy with the happiness of our neighbor, then essentially we are envious of our neighbor because we don't really find that his pleasure is my pleasure. In fact, on the contrary, I can't speak for everyone, but I know at least for myself that when my neighbor or someone that I don't like, that person does a little bit of more progress than myself, I become very unhappy. When I shouldn't be, because ultimately they are performing the work of Krishna. But somehow or the other, in our hearts, we do feel some level of dissatisfaction if someone that we don't like performs better than us. And that is nothing but an exposition of envy. That essentially shows that we are envious. And when we perform better than someone else, then we also become happy. But actually that should not be the case, because we should be worried that, okay, I've performed well, but why isn't this other person able to perform well? Because ultimately we are all servants of Krishna. We are all trying to serve Krishna in our different capacities. So why is it that when someone else performs better service than us, we become dissatisfied? If anything, we should be more satisfied that yes, someone is able to serve Krishna better than me. That is why in the Christian tradition, actually, there is a prayer called the Litany of Humility, where the devotee, I don't know who wrote it, it's a very powerful prayer, where the person praying, he says to God, he says to Lord Jesus, he says that Lord Jesus, may others be glorified in front of me, and may I be rebuked in front of everyone. He says, to achieve, because like majority of us, we will say, okay, fine, let everyone be glorified, but why should I get rebuked? But this is a very difficult thing to say, that let everyone be glorified and let I be rebuked in front of everyone. That actually goes to show that we actually don't have any level of envy if we are able to sincerely pray for this kind of feeling or this kind of mentality. In fact, he goes on to say, there's a very bold statement he says towards the end of the prayer, where he says that may others become more spiritually conscious, or may others become more spiritually advanced than me, including my own juniors and including my own people that I'm training. May they become more and more advanced than me. and provided that I also achieve the minimum level of perfection that is required. So he says, he goes on to pray like that. Now, obviously, that may be a very, very difficult thing to say, because especially when we come to some higher position, when we're looking after people who are slightly junior to us, we generally get this mentality that, especially in the minds of preachers, they get this mentality that, I am a bit superior than this other person and it's my job to guide them, etc. But how many of us really genuinely think that the reason I'm cultivating this devotee is so that one day they become pure and they become Krishna conscious? And when they go back to Krishna, they will be able to put a word of suggestion for me, and then maybe I might have a chance of deliverance. Now, if we really genuinely preach in that mentality, our whole consciousness will shift. And the more and more we meditate on this, and the more and more we actually try to implement this in our practice, then it is possible slowly for us to get rid of envy also. Now, ultimately, it seems from Narottam Das Thakur's poem that envy will ultimately only be curbed by Krishna. But we need to put in our effort also. Like we know through the Damodar Leela that the rope was always 2 fingers or 2 inches short, and one of them was Krishna's, which indicates that one of them is Krishna's mercy and one of them is our own effort. So if we don't put in our own effort, then it's unlikely that Krishna's mercy will try to, that Krishna will also try to give his mercy to us. So only when he appreciates and he sees that we've tried our hardest, like Yashoda Ma, she was trying to tie Krishna and she was trying to tie Krishna with the best of her efforts and she was failing. Then Krishna's mercy kicks in and then he makes the impossible possible. So as it is also said in the Bible that for man these things are impossible, but for God all of these things are possible. So that does mean that we should not pray for them. So because if we don't knock, it won't be open. If we don't seek, we will not find. So that is why it's important that we also cultivate our mentality so that we don't become envious of devotees also. And whenever someone does better than us, we should glorify them. Whenever someone does, and when someone is not doing better than us, rather than being happy, we should try to encourage them to do better than us. Now, this may be a difficult thing because our false ego generally kicks in and we don't want to see others getting better than us, but this is the only way we will be able to curb our false ego also. That is why it's very important that we try to perform Krishna consciousness with the right attitude. Srila Prabhupada also says many times that advancement in Krishna consciousness depends on the attitude of the follower. So advancement in Krishna consciousness depends on the attitude of the follower, which means that if our attitude is not right, then our advancement will be very, very slow. In fact, it may even reverse and we may also go down if our attitude is improper. Whereas if our attitude is correct, then we will be able to slowly advance in Krishna consciousness also. I mean, this is also a very huge topic because the more a devotee advances, the more he feels that he is more fallen. I mean, that discussion probably is not relevant for today anyways, but it just goes to show that the more, like for example, there's one very nice verse in Caitanya Caritamrita in which Prabodhananda Saraswati is praying to Lord Chaitanya. And he mentions in a prayer, he says, Vanchitwasmi, Vanchitwasmi, Vanchitwasmi na shamsaya, Vishvam Gora Rupe Rase Magnam, Sparshopi Mama Na Bhavat. He says that, oh Lord, I have been cheated, I have been cheated, I have been cheated. Why I have been cheated? He says the whole world is inundated in the flood of the love of Gauranga, but I haven't even received a single drop of it. So, I mean, this is the level of humility that a pure devotee can go to. He will see that everyone else is engaged in the service of Krishna, but he feels that he himself has no taste for the holy name of the Lord, or he himself has no taste for the love of God. So, this level is something that we should aspire towards. Not that we can force our way into the kingdom of God, but by following in the footsteps of the acharyas, by following in the footsteps of the Guru, whatever he has given us, that we follow their instructions, we hope that one day we may be able to achieve that level, not for our own perfection, but for the satisfaction of the Guru. Because we don't want the Guru to come back again to deliver us. We want to deliver ourselves for the sake of our Guru, so that he doesn't have to come back and deliver us. Srila Prabhupada said that many times. Because in Guru Puja also it says, Chakshudan Dilojai Janme Janme Prabhu Se, which means that he is my Lord birth after birth. So one devotee asked Srila Prabhupada, they said that, if we don't complete our Krishna consciousness in one life, will you come back again? Very angry, and he said that, well, you have to complete your Krishna consciousness in this life. Don't make me come back again. So Srila Prabhupada was very much interested that the devotees take Krishna consciousness seriously and also advance. So if we have the right attitude, we will be able to advance in Krishna consciousness. The other three types, subtle types of offenses which are explained are when one becomes angry upon seeing a devotee, and when one is not happy to see a devotee. These are also considered offenses. But to be able to get to that level, we first need to remove this envy, because if we don't remove this envy of devotees, then we won't be able to advance any further. That is why, actually, having said that, so I will stop there. If anyone has any comments, any questions, or anything they would like to share, we can do so. Yes, Prabhu?
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Jai, thank you so much for your class. I just want to make a comment on the first part where we're talking about Haridas Thakur, and in purport, Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu says to Haridas that you are definitely an incarnation of Prahlad Maharaj. So it is common in Chaitanya Leela that the great personalities, they had dual, incarnations. Just for instance, Ramananda Roy, he is said to be an incarnation of Lalita, Gopi, and also Arjuna. So, of course, Lalita was a confidential servant of Krishna, so in that capacity she was always confidential. Ramananda Roy confidentially described the pastimes. In fact, he was only one of the three personalities that was able to confidentially discuss Krishna's pastimes. But then also Lord Chaitanya said to Ramananda Roy that you are just Ramananda Roy. He can decorate young girls for dancing, whereas nobody else can without becoming agitated. So in that capacity, he was Arjuna, because we know that in the 13th year, Arjuna took the form of a eunuch and he dressed the dancing girls.
That's right. Yes, that's
so
right.
in the same Haridas Thakur, of course, he was born as Lord Brahma, but then Lord Chaitanya, Lord Brahma took birth. We know that it's a history. But then Lord Chaitanya described him as Prahlad Maharaj. Then later on in the Prakash Leela, he brought up Prahlad. He said that when you were being whipped in 22 marketplaces, I was there to protect you, because we know that Haridas Thakur didn't even feel the beatings.
That's
and
right.
so severe. So that was in the mood of Prahlad Maharaj, because Prahlad Maharaj also got tortured by all the different sort of methods that they threw him the pit of snakes and tried to stab him with spears, and of course he was protected by the Lord, embraced by the Lord. So in that capacity, different sort of pastimes come
together.
Different personalities.
Yeah, definitely. That's right. Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that out.
Just one more thing. I heard in Mayapur, I think, that actually Haridas Thakur was born in a Brahmin family.
Yes.
They perished very early, and then he was adopted by.
Yeah, that's why I said, at least apparently it looks like he was born in a Mlecha family. But yes, I've heard that as well, that he was born in a Brahmana family. Yeah. Thank you.
When you're talking about envy,
Yes, Prabhu.
and you say, unfortunately, it can even exist in the spiritual world.
Oh yeah, yeah. I should have probably clarified that a little bit.
I could just finish.
Yeah, sure.
I was reading recently where the gopis are envious of the flute, for example. And they're so envious that how come this upstart piece of bamboo
exactly. That's right. So in the spiritual world, also envy can be, there can be envy to serve Krishna more and more. But that envy is essentially like, for example, we see that among the gopis also there is apparent enviousness. Like there's one group of gopis and there's another group of gopis and they're envious of each other. But the difference is between material envy and spiritual envy is that in the spiritual world, when Krishna disappears from the Rasa Leela, all the devotees start consoling each other. Apparently, so to the eyes of everyone else, it appeared that they were envious, but actually they were in good solidarity with each other. And they were supporting each other, they were crying on each other's shoulders and consoling one another. And whereas in the material world, if let's say one Krishna leaves one group and goes to the other, the group in which Krishna might have gone to, then that group would become happy and the other group would become sad. But we see in the spiritual world that when Krishna leaves one group and goes to the other, they console each other. So envy in the spiritual world is ultimately directed at pleasing Krishna, because that envious, he enjoys that envious rasa essentially. But in the material world, it's directed towards ourselves. Yeah, we want to look for our own happiness and our own satisfaction. Whereas in the spiritual world, it's more to serve Krishna. So it's, yeah, quite different, but superficially it may appear so. Yeah. Thank you so much for that, Prabhu. Hare Krishna. Any other comments or questions? No. Okay, so having said that, we will finish there. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyaivacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Just to make a very small announcement, can you bring that back? So at the Bhakti Center, we just ordered some books on Caitanya Mahaprabhu. They're like very small. It's like just got complete stories, no philosophy. It's like very small books. So if anyone would like